this act, this bill, it's a bill right now, so, thinking back to Schoolhouse Rock, this bill proposes that the Department of Agriculture would create an office or an agency within itself called the Equitable Land Access Service. And this service would be created and established. It would create, first of all, the Undersecretary of Equitable Land Access. And these are buzzwords. These are buzzwords, but the purpose is to fight systemic racism. To fight systemic racism in the United States, because the people who authored this bill, or a spokesperson on Twitter, or a kind of stand-in spokesperson, somebody who worked on it, one of his staffers, I believe, was tweeting about it and saying that this will work to rectify systemic racism in the United States, because since 1920 we had, in 1920 we had so many black farmers. We had so many black farmers, and I don't really remember the number because it kind of doesn't matter, because he's talking about we had so many black farmers in 1920, and then over the past 100 years, we don't have any black farmers anymore. We have so little, we have so few. And that's, of course, because of systemic racism. There is no other explanation for why this could be happening. It has nothing to do with black people moving into urban areas because they got rid of their land or they just didn't want to. It has nothing to do with the fact that modern black people don't want to be farmers. They want to live. They don't want to live there. They want blah, blah, blah. They want to do whatever. And it definitely has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that the entire agricultural industry in general has shrunk. It's contracted majorly since 1920. If you think back to your high school history class, you'll remember that it was around World War II, the first time that the urban population exceeded that of the rural population. And so it would make sense that as of 1920, after World War II, that after that period, we would see a rapid decrease over these past 100 years of people working in agriculture. This industry actually has been declining since the Civil War because the Union was already industrializing. The southern portion of the United States was far more agricultural. However, when your country gets war-ravaged, the southern portion of the United States was war-ravaged, and in many cases farms and plantations were burnt down or destroyed, or they were just unable to continue because money was taken or things were taken from the farm, or for whatever reason they were incapable of continuing on. These people move into cities and they take up different professions. And so ever since then, the agricultural profession in the United States has shrunk. And it shrunk rapidly since the end of the First World War. And so it only makes sense that we don't have that many black farmers. It's funny also because what they're talking about, it's not even as if now, first of all, before I say this anecdote or whatever, it's not as though these people were pushed out. I mean, in general, agriculture has been, I wouldn't say that it's become automated. It hasn't become automated, but it's become more efficient for fewer people to do it. They have machines and tractors and balers, and you can, I'm not a farmer, so I'm not, but it does in the same way with the cotton gin. You used to have to pick the seeds out of individual gatherings of individual bushels. Do you bushel cotton? I don't know. But you gather the cotton and you pull the seeds out of it by hand, and then they create the cotton gin, and that takes away the need for that. Now you just push the cotton into this machine, you crank it, and then you have de-seeded cotton. You have cotton which can be used to make things that's ready to go. And so, likewise, for all of these other farming and agricultural processes, they've created machinery and stuff. So as a whole, it's shrunk because people are moving into cities, or they had moved into cities, and now they have, ways to do these things with fewer people for less money, because farmers are, they're not getting the wages that they deserve from everywhere else, because all of that goes into big business, and so they get subsidies, and that's how they have to do things. But also, I remember looking at the numbers that this guy was talking about, And it's not even as if black people are like woefully underrepresented in agriculture. I mean, yeah, more than white people, they do prefer to live in urban areas. But it's like this, God, for some reason when we talk about black people, I was saying to somebody the other day that it's like there's this like universal inability or refusal when we're talking about this stuff to understand the idea of per capita or proportionate. Black people make up 13% of the population. We all know this. And so if black people only make up 5% of the agricultural population or the agricultural workers in the US, that means significantly less. Yeah, it's disproportionate, but it means significantly less than if Hispanics only made up 5% of the agricultural workforce or something like that. And so for some reason we refuse to, I mean, not we, obviously we talk about it, but everybody just suddenly becomes incapable or unwilling to understand what the words disproportionate mean in relation to these kinds of things. And so now that's the situation. That's what's happening with agriculture. Of course, that is because of systemic racism. That's not because of the way that the economy has naturally evolved or the way that it's evolved because of business interests or anything like that on the whole. It's purely because of systemic racism. And so that means that it is something which needs to be rectified. And it needs to be rectified by the government. The government has to rectify it. And we can't rectify it by any sensible way, presuming that it were even a problem. Instead, what we have to do is do something which has never been tried before. It's a great idea. It's a great, very novel idea. And, you know, I don't know, has it never been tried before, or has it been tried before to great success? Because surely we would not be trying something which had been tried time and time again and led to, you know, mass murder and genocide of innocent people and the starvation of everybody else. Surely we wouldn't be doing something that had led to that level of catastrophe before. I'm just sure that that wouldn't happen, right? Of course, we know that that's not true. So we'll talk a little bit about exactly what this bill does now. So like I said, it creates the Undersecretary of Equitable Land Access. It's hard to even remember because it's so stupid and empty and just... It's so stupid. It means nothing. Equitable land access. What does that mean? I have access to buy property if I can afford it. You have access to buy a company if you afford it. So do black people. There's nothing unequitable about that. Of course, we know what equitable means to them. So the eligible land access service would be responsible for using an allotted sum of government money. Actually, I don't even know if the money is allotted or if they just have a blank check to do whatever they have to do, but there is a requirement, because I didn't even look into like what this will cost, because that's not even the primary thing. I don't think that it's not like the Green New Deal or something where it's just like astronomical, like this is impossible, we can't do that. It's still money that doesn't need to be spent, but their purpose is to buy land from willing sellers. They're supposed to buy land from willing sellers. Now, do you think that anybody's going to want to sell their land to the government for fair market price? Because that's what it says. It says that they will buy it for no more than fair market price. Are people sitting around? Because they could sell it anywhere at any time for the most part. You can generally sell land unless it's on a terrible tract of land that has no use. Then people, you know, are generally willing to buy it. And so they're supposed to find willing sellers. Now, will some people do this? Yeah, maybe they get propositioned by the government and they think, yeah, you know what, I don't really need that portion of my land. You can have it, buy. But the government, if this bill becomes law, will have to grant no less than 20,000 allotments of land to eligible individuals. 20,000. 20,000 a year. 20,000 allotments of land per year for 10 years. Now these grants will be given out at a maximum of 160 acres um, per black person. 160 acres per black person at no cost to them. At no cost to them. And so, the thing is that that's a lot of land. 160 acres. Now, because who gets more? Who gets less? How do we decide these things? What makes somebody eligible? Because here's the thing. So these people that work in the agricultural workforce that are black, they make up a small percentage, right? That's why we're doing this. And so will these people make up enough of the population in order to take on 20,000 of these grants at 160 acres? Probably not. For 10 years, I mean, because on one hand, yeah, you give these people land, and the idea is that they hire other black people, and we'll get more into that in just a minute. But 20,000 a year for 10 years, I mean, that's like, who is eligible? Who of these people that are already in the agricultural workforce is eligible to run a farm? Are they? Because presumably if they were capable of doing that, they would own a farm. And if not, maybe they just haven't been able to save up the money to buy their own land yet. But that's like not all of them, because most people that work in agriculture, I mean, you've got people who own family farms. You've got people who work at maybe a corporate farm or some kind of business that runs this farm. And most of them are, just like in every industry, they are not, people who learn some highly technical skill to do what they're doing. They're doing something which they were able to learn to do, which is great. But it's not like you need like a big degree or some kind of big technical education or anything like that. They're, driving a tractor, or they're driving some other machinery. And you have very few people at the top throughout these things, or throughout these organizations, which are like foremen or, or managing these ranches or these farms. And so I would say that of the small population of black people, there's a very small population of these people who are capable of running a farm. Furthermore, it's not like these land grants are big enough to where somebody can start a company and employ a bunch of other people. So most of these people who are receiving these grants would be receiving them to run small single-family farms. Maybe they employ a couple other people, but they're supposed to run farms on their own. And so since the bill says no less than 20,000 a year, no less than 20,000 a year. It doesn't mean not up to 1,000. It says no less than 20,000 a year. And so what that means is that at a certain point, you're going to run out of people who are qualified and capable of running their own farm or ranch. And they're just going to start having to give these out to every Tom, Dick, and Harry, or every Jamal, Daryl, and Ladarius that decides that they want to become a farmer. And do they really want to become a farmer, or do they want free land? Because remember, as I said a minute ago, this isn't like you're eligible and you receive a subsidy and you get, this financial loan, this government guaranteed loan to start your business or anything like that. That's not the case. You get free land grant. And so after a certain point, you're going to run out of qualified people, or people who want to take it seriously, people who can really run a farm. You're going to run out of these people, and you're going to be getting people from Atlanta, people from Detroit perhaps, depending on where these are. And they're just going to be given free land. People oftentimes who probably do not have any intention of actually farming, because farming is hard work. And, if you want to work hard, like in the way that farming requires, and you're not doing that in the place where you are, because if you work as hard as a farmer has to work, then you can make a good life for yourself. That's a pretty solid rule, I think. If you're able to work that hard, then no matter where you are, you can either work to make a good life for yourself, or you have like the grit and resolve to get out of that situation, get into another one, right? So a lot of these people will just not be working. They won't be working. They got their free land. There's no provision to take this away from people, because that's not what it's about. That would be furthering the systemic racism that, runs our country, allegedly. If you hold people to account and you say that you have to keep up this production or something like that, then that's not good. That's not good, because that is, a colonial mindset. That's a colonial mindset, saying that people have to actually work when you give them tools to work with for free. And so, like I said, for 10 years, people will be receiving, and like I said, who decides how big these plots of land is? I'm guessing that it's probably only decided by what they're able to get. If they're able to get, maybe there's a 40-acre plot here or a 60-acre plot there, and it's surrounded and they can't expand it, then maybe somebody will get that one or something like that. Or maybe if they're more qualified, they get more land. I don't know how that's doled out, but 160 acres at $20,000 a year for 10 years, after all of this, it makes up 1.6% of the entire landmass of the United States. Nearly 2% of the landmass of the United States will be owned by people who are, generally speaking, not qualified to work it. In many cases, I'm sure, unwilling to work it. People who did not show that they could properly steward the land that they had elsewhere, if they were living in a rental home or they owned a home elsewhere. It's like, these, who's receiving these? Again, because like I said at the beginning, I'm sure that at the outset of this, there will be people who are qualified and who may do fine. But there's not enough of them in order to do the work. Now, thus far, in my, explanation of what we've got here, I've been addressing this from a practical point of view. Presuming that everything goes as it should, that they buy this land and that they get the applications that they set out to get, and they grant the land in the way that they want. And just practically speaking, this doesn't work. But the real danger here, is that this is all predicated on buying this land from willing sellers. And what happens if you don't have 20,000 willing sellers? Honestly, you probably have to find more than 20,000 willing sellers a year, because you have two properties that back up to each other. This guy's willing to sell this much, this guy's willing to sell this much, and there's your plot of land in the middle. So you have to find more than 20,000 willing sellers a year for 10 years. Are you going to find that? I don't think so. Because people don't want to sell their land. Maybe they're using it. Maybe they don't want, urban people moving into their rural conservative area, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. So at that point, because the bill says that they have to dole out 20,000 grants a year, what that means is that if you have to do that, you have to have land, and so people refusing to sell to you is unacceptable. It's not acceptable for people to willingly say, I don't want to sell this to you, because you've got a quota. You literally have a quota to meet. Not hypothetical, not, oh, we got to do this much or that. No, like literally, it says no less than 20,000 a year. And so at that point, you start getting people's land taken from them through eminent domain. The government starts saying, this land is ours now, here is fair market price, whatever we decide that is. And mind you, who do you think is going to be running this equitable land access service? Who do you think is going to be running this? Do you think that it's going to be a sensible person? Do you think that it's going to be a reasonable person who analyzes, okay, where can this land come from that it's going to hurt people the least? Or do you think that it's going to be run by some radical black ideologue that thinks, I want to punish these racists in these rural areas that voted for Trump? that took agricultural employment away from black people, that did all of these other things. Because remember what they think about the rural United States. And so very quickly this turns away from a program where they buy land and then give it away. And it very quickly becomes a land seizure program where they are seizing land from racists. Now, don't get me wrong, it's already implicitly in the bill. That's what it is. That's the purpose of it. Anytime they talk about rectifying systemic racism, what they really mean is punishing the racists, punishing the people whom they perceive to have wronged them. That's really what it is. And you know this, but that's what it is. That's what the bill is. And so, but in practice, it very quickly becomes a land seizure program where they're just giving it away, they're stealing it, they're seizing it, and they're giving it away. And who's to say which land they take? Do they take a sliver of land that nobody's using, or do they take the most productive part of the land? Because if they're not willing to sell it to you and you have to steal it, well, then all bets are off and you can take whatever land you want. And so maybe you want the most productive, most fertile part of the land because that's what our black Americans deserve, because they've been so wronged by these racist farmers and these rural state governments that, you know, in these states where there's never been a black population higher than 2% or something. And so then that's where the punishment begins. That's where the punishment begins. And so not only do you have unqualified people running the farms that, you know, now will no longer feed people, but you have people, the actual productive farmers, losing work. Productive farmers are losing work, and in many cases, maybe they lose their homes. We don't know. Maybe they are run out, because what happens when you replace a population with a different population? We know this is one of the issues at the crux of everything that we talk about here, is you cannot replace a population with another population and get the same result. You can't get the same result. You won't get the same community. You won't get the same productivity. And that's not even a one-for-one replacement. That's like, what if you inject a large portion of one people into a different group of other people? What do you think happened with Obama's housing policy, where they were putting, so-called affordable housing like Section 8 and projects and stuff? They're putting these into white conservative suburbs, which were generally created in many cases to get away from the problems of the urban centers, which were often caused by the very people who are now being brought into these enclaves, these safety enclaves. That's what it was, and it drops property values. It makes people leave further. They get further and further away from the city. It becomes more and more expensive to get away from that, and these places become less and less productive. They become more and more run down, and this same thing will happen in the countryside, where these things are happening. Because, number one, you have these people moving out from the urban centers, these victims of racism, these African Americans who've received equitable land access. Equitable land access, by the way, doesn't mean access. It means equitable land reception, seizure. And so now you have these people in these areas that are maybe hiring other blacks. They don't want to hire the local population. And so now not only the farmers are out of work, but the local population that was working on the farms before, now they're losing work, and they're losing work. Or maybe the farms just don't operate, and so they're losing work in that way. Regardless, though, you're going to have people moving away, because suddenly there are problems there which were not there before. And so they move away, they move to a different place. If perhaps they don't have a farm or they don't have a stake in this area. And so the property values drop, and then who moves in? Who moves in? We know who moves in when the property values drop and crime goes up. Somebody moves in because somebody else moved out. And then, at a certain point, in these areas where these things happen, the former majority, the population which was, you could say, native to this area, becomes either a minority or a much, much, much smaller majority. And suddenly they're not welcome in their own homes. And we see exactly what happened in South Africa. We see what happened in Rhodesia turned Zimbabwe. Because you have to understand that as bad as it is, and it's, I mean, over 1.5% of the landmass of the United States, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. But even though, you know, that's not the end of the world, what it amounts to is actually more than 1.6% of the landmass in the United States, because people are going to leave and other people are going to move into that land. And then with the problems that you have, like the crime, I mean, it just makes it worse and worse. It makes these places uninhabitable. And so the problem spirals out of control. The problem gets worse and worse, and it spirals out of control. And eventually, you know, we know how the story ends. We've seen it before, and it's been a catastrophe every time. In places like Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, you have the state and the people willing to fight back. In other places, you have South Africa, for example, where these radical black nationalists are able to take control of the government completely, which is what we're seeing here, in part. It's a move towards that. It's a move towards that with Kamala Harris and everybody else, and what Joe Biden would like to enable. And in that situation, there's no reprieve. There's no way that you can fight back because they wield the state power. And so we know how it goes. We know how it goes, and that's what they're trying to do. Now, it's unlikely to pass because, you know, if the Republicans hold the Senate, this is unlikely to pass. I have no doubt that the Democrats, despite how ludicrous it is, I have no doubt in my mind that the Democrats would probably pass it through the House. That's possible. Now, I mean, maybe like Joe Manchin might not vote for it because these are his voters that we're talking about, and maybe somebody else, you know, it depends. There are, maybe not, but, well, that's in the Senate, I guess, so that's already, you know, a good thing. But if the Republicans hold the Senate, it won't pass. But it's a peek into the incompetence and the white hatred that's in Congress. And it tells you a little bit about what they will try to do when the Republicans lose the Senate and they have control of both houses and the presidency. Because, I mean, like, look, is the Supreme Court going to stop this? Can it stop this? What happens? Because they ignore the Supreme Court. They don't care. And so it highlights the importance of what we're doing, because we are the only ones that get this. Yeah, the Republican Party would say, no, I'm not going to do that because it's just so flagrantly criminal and irresponsible that the Republican voters in these states would say, no, I'm not doing that. If you do this, I will not vote for you. But they would, if it were not so flagrant and if it were not so obviously catastrophic, then the Republicans might be willing to say, well, we won't do this, but we'll do a watered-down version of this, or we'll do something else in return. And we inch ever closer to it. We're the only ones who understand what's really behind this. When normal Republicans, when in the Senate hear this, or in the House, when they hear what we're talking about right here, they don't think these people are anti-white and they're trying to destroy our nation. Or they just are anti-white and they are going to destroy our nation through their incompetence. They don't hear that. What they hear is, wow, these people are so stupid. These people are socialists. They want to give away free land. Wow. You dummies, don't you know that socialism doesn't work? Wow. You're so dumb. They think that this would work. Well, I'm smart enough to know it wouldn't work. They don't hear what this really is. They don't know that this is like an attempted takeover of our government for the genocide of American people. They don't get that. For white, rural people, they don't understand that. And so it highlights the importance of our movement because we're the only ones that do get it. We're the only ones that do understand what the stakes are. You know, I mean, maybe other people understand what the stakes are, but they don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the grit, they don't have the ability or the smarts or the intelligence to actually get involved in government and make any kind of change to it. But this is the importance of taking over the Republican Party. This is why it has to happen. This is why it has to happen, and this is why it has to be us, because we are the only ones that get it. We're the only ones who understand what is happening, what has to happen, and are capable of doing it, capable of executing it. And so we have to do that. We have to do that for so many reasons that we've talked about, with the Republican Party being unwilling to back Trump, unwilling to back us, unwilling to defend our interests. We know all of this, and so these things have to do it. These are our interests. These are the interests that we're talking about. Namely, right now, it's the presidency. But in the future, these are the interests that we'll be discussing. These are the interests that have to be defended in government. And so it's not just about getting ourselves into office, because those things have to happen, but it's about people getting into local party positions. Like I talked about yesterday, and I'm not going into the actual specifics of that like I did. I don't remember if I did that yesterday, but I know I did it on Saturday. I'm not talking about these things more specifically, but just this highlights the necessity and the urgency that we face, and why it has to be us, why it has to be America First conservatives running the GOP. That's what it's about, because otherwise, I mean, right now it's Trump, but it's like Trump and this movement is the only thing standing in between land seizure, extrajudicial racial murders against white people, actual systemic racism against white people. Because look, you know, despite our dislike for people saying we're not racist, they're the real racists, we actually literally are not asking for systemic racism or racial anything. We're not asking for that, because on a fair playing field, we know that we'll be fine. We'll succeed. We'll be fine. We don't need that. That's not what we're talking about. Now, things to protect the historic American nation and its prodigy, that's great. We'd like to see that someday. But just on a fair playing field, we don't need that. So we're not even asking for that. But in the future, I mean, we are the only ones that are standing between, like I said, us and our children from extrajudicial racial murder. I mean, like literally like reverse Jim Crow. I mean, nasty stuff. People being thrown in jail for Twitter accounts that they have. Total destruction of any form of free speech on the internet or any form of mass media. I mean, we are the only thing standing in between that, save for Trump. And so this is the urgency. This is why it's so urgent, why it has to happen now. This is like why Nick tweeted out yesterday, there's no time for a third party. This has to happen now. And so, like I said, this is not something which has likelihood to pass the Senate, but in the future, this is what they're going to try to do. They're already trying to do it. We've been talking about it for years, how this is where things would go. And look, hey, now they're trying it in the open. And is it going to pass this time? No. But unless somebody does something very soon, this is what will happen. And so that's that. That's the Justice for Black Farmers Act. That's what it's called. It's called the Justice for Black Farmers Act. Justice. It's all about justice for black farmers. More like, you know, handouts for urban black welfare collectors, because that's what it'll turn into. So that's that story. The Land Seizure Act. Now for the